Well, I think it's fair to say that F1 spring break is almost over. We're finally going to get a schedule that looks somewhat normal. Unless, obviously we end up with a war with Canada. But just before things do sort of like hot up, there's something, whilst I've been reflecting on what's happened so far this season, that I kind of wanted to point out a little bit more, specifically about a certain driver. Now, to sort of like introduce this and it kind of gives a reason why I want to talk about this driver, I want to take you guys back about 5.5 years. A lot of things changed since then, but 5.5 years ago, we were all sitting at home for some strange reason. We were watching another dominant Mercedes display, another dominant Lewis Hamilton display, and Lewis Hamilton was basically winning every single race until he got some sort of illness. It's called COVID. I don't know if anyone heard of that. I don't know. And so a certain youngster was drafted into the Mercedes team and almost won. Do you remember that time? Do you remember the time when George Russell was considered this wonderkid? The guy that was going to win 15 million world championships before he'd even won a race. The guy that was considered the qualifying specialist. It was crazy times. And it felt like the discussion was going to be, all Russell needs is a good car and he'll finally win a world championship. And then we come to this year and he does, but he doesn't. Now, of course, we're only 4 races into the season right now, and anything can happen. Look at what happened last season. We had Oscar Piastri seemingly dominating the entire season, and Lando Norris ended up winning. But it certainly feels like the wonderkid spark, the one that is going to win the world championship, has gone away from George Russell. And it's kind of in this situation where majority of people either don't care or just mock him. You might have seen, obviously, the memes, and the memes don't help, and we'll certainly talk about that, but it feels like it's all gone a little bit wrong. That Antonelli is the one seemingly destined to win the championship, and yeah, probably before a fall, and it probably will go wrong for Antonelli at some point, but there certainly seems to be more positivity on that side of the garage. So what's happened? What has happened? And I suppose this is a bit of a challenging question to answer, because to kind of work out what has happened, you kind of need to get an idea of what's happened in between time. What's happened in those 5.5 years from George Russell being this next best thing to now being just another F1 driver. And I suppose this is where we could probably start off with, whereas is it that it is bad luck, and where is it that it's down to bad decisions? And when I say bad decisions, the bad decisions I'm really talking about aren't really George Russell's bad decisions. None of them are, in fact. Let's think about when he started, when he was at Williams, right? And it was a dog of a car, right? And George Russell was outperforming that Williams machinery. That wasn't on him that he wasn't getting any points. Well, there was a couple of races, of course, that he messed it up. But majority of the time that wasn't on him. He was kind of overdriving the machinery, and most of the time was pretty successful in it. The Sakir Grand Prix that he almost won, that wasn't on him either. You know, the tyre situation, in a sense, his race was sabotaged by Mercedes in a weird way. But I will point out the first real bad decision that was made, and certainly by Mercedes, was the situation regarding George Russell. Because here's the thing. If you were to look at that race as a standalone race, the Sakir Grand Prix, now I think Valtteri Bottas, the Mercedes stalwart, finished ahead of George Russell, but it very much felt like George Russell was the better driver out of him and Valtteri Bottas. So bad decision number one from Mercedes' side of things was, why did they not promote him to Mercedes then and there? Because here's the thing, right? If we were to compare him to Antonelli, for example, right? Now I know the circumstances are very different, but the thing that meant that Toto Wolff couldn't promote George Russell straight away, he said it was down to the fact that George Russell hadn't matured. And he pointed out situations where he was having to go at the team, or later on in 2021, the incident at Imola, him crashing into Valtteri Bottas. Yeah, Williams was at the same place as Mercedes at that point, and then angrily blamed it on Bottas and said that the maturity meant that George Russell did not deserve to be at Mercedes as of yet and needed to mature a bit more. And then you look at Antonelli, and like I say, we are talking different circumstances here. For Antonelli, the gates just opened for him to join, with Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari. Now, true, Carlos Sainz could have gone to Mercedes, but it was almost like it was a free rein for Kimi Antonelli to go. But he peaked in junior Formula 2 at exactly the perfect time. Actually, quite similar to Lewis Hamilton, that there have been other good rookies at the same time as Lewis Hamilton, but it just so happened that a seat was opening up at McLaren just at the point that both drivers, Kimi Raikkonen and Juan Pablo Montoya, was like, I'm done. But George was a talent that didn't get that opportunity to start off with. And here's the thing, right, is George Russell's not a bad driver, right? That's really important to point out. And I think in terms of George Russell, it just feels like he's come at the wrong time for everything. Went into a top team at the wrong time. Went into Mercedes at the point where Mercedes made a terrible car. And then, in terms of his reputation, joined Formula 1 as quite a big driver at the point when Netflix was starting up and we started getting the memes. The latte drinking, the weird adverts that he was doing for Mercedes, all that sort of weird stuff that kind of gave him this reputation of he's just a little bit off. Something's not quite right. And then there's the other thing. The big meme about George Russell that has happened over the past few years, and especially when he's won races, has been this does nothing, wins anyway. You know, you think of George Russell winning in the Austrian Grand Prix a couple of years ago. He only won because Lando Norris and Max Verstappen crashed out, and everyone blamed that on George Russell for some reason, that he didn't really deserve that win. And that can sometimes feel a little bit off. And so when we end up in this situation where Kimi Antonelli is genuinely doing well, the meme comes out, does nothing and loses. But how true is that? How fair is that? I would argue it's not fair at all. And here's my reason why. There are two types of F1 drivers. Well, actually, there's three. There's a type of, and actually, we're going to talk about it in both ways here. So I'm going to first start off with, when it comes to the three types of Formula One drivers, that there are those that are aggressive, make aggressive moves in their as their first port of call, and then there are those that are calm and measured and just make the best use out of their race, get the best race pace. And then there are other drivers that are like Ricardo Rossis and Lance Stroll. But that's another matter altogether. Now, George Russell is in that second part. He is the one that makes the best use of the pace on a long term, doesn't make aggressive moves as such. And actually, there's nothing wrong with that in terms of being a world champion. I mean, think about it. Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton developed that when they were at Mercedes and Ferrari, that they got the best pace out of the car. They didn't need to push too far in terms of aggressive moves and diving down the inside. It was just about getting the best pace out of the car. And there are other drivers that are like that. Think about Jarno Trulli, for example, the Trulli train, making the best use of the car because he would qualify well and then hold others up because they couldn't get past him. And there are those styles of drivers. Felipe Massa, another great example. Somebody who was a great driver when it came to long distances and getting the right pace out of the car. Likely you guys can think of some as well. And then you get the aggressive types, Max Verstappen, Alonso certainly in that place. I would argue that Oscar Piastri is that aggressive type as well. Colapinto certainly is as well. That it is like that aggression. And the challenging thing is that when you are in a team that is dominant and you are clear out in a way the best driver of that team, you can do that without worrying about it. But when it's at the very least a competition between you and your teammate, and it is, nip and tuck between the two of you guys, you kind of have to get your elbows out. And I don't see that successfully happen for Russell too much. And then there's the other type when it comes to the two types of drivers of, like I said before, there are those that have everything planned out for them in the perfect opportunity, and then there are those that have the other way round. Now, in terms of this, I put Russell in a similar sort of position to, Fernando Alonso. Now, I know Fernando Alonso's won 2 titles, George Russell's won none. But Fernando Alonso was in a similar sort of position to Russell. Alonso being at Bernardi, Russell being at Williams, and when they started moving up the ranks, now the Benetton situation, well, they were incredible at that time. But if you think about it, Alonso joining McLaren feels similar vibes to what happened at Mercedes when Antonelli joined Mercedes. That McLaren were very interested in Fernando Alonso, just as much as Mercedes were very interested in promoting George Russell. But then as soon as the wonderkid came along, in their eyes, whether that be Hamilton, whether that be Kimi Antonelli, it has felt like everything's dropped and they're going elsewhere. So we're going to play a little bit of let's pretend scenario. Let's pretend that Kimi Antonelli does win this championship by a landslide. What does George Russell do? I don't know. I feel like George maybe needs to have a look and see do I need to be at a team where they see me as the star driver? For example, if Max Verstappen was to leave Red Bull, which gets talked about so many years, it feels like it's never going to happen, but, you know, would George Russell go to Red Bull? Let's say that the Aston Martin project, they finally realise Lance Stroll cannot do it at Aston Martin, or Alonso does retire, which doesn't feel likely, but you never know. Could he go to Aston Martin and be the out and out star of a team there? You know, maybe given Alpine's rise, I don't know. Maybe it is worth George Russell looking around. And I think this is actually where I kind of want to go to the frustration I find with the way that Formula One is set up right now. And I'm talking about the academies now. The Ferrari Academy, the Mercedes Academy, the Alpine Academy. I'm pretty sure there might be one more as well. These academies feel like they are both great and terrible at the same time. Because the way that they're great is that they obviously provide some sort of financial support to these drivers, and we know how bloody expensive it is for F1 drivers to make it up through the junior ranks. But I feel like the academies also kind of restrict the drivers as well. There was a time in the 2000s where driver moves were less family and more like free for all. I'd take you back again to those McLaren days, the McLaren days when Lewis Hamilton first joined. Because yes, Lewis Hamilton joined McLaren as a junior driver, but think about it in this circumstance. Kimi Raikkonen went straight from Sauber to McLaren. Juan Pablo Montoya was at Williams, moved to McLaren. This was a time when Williams were a big team on their own. They weren't part of any family. Montoya and Raikkonen went to McLaren just because they were great drivers and McLaren wanted to poach them. And what happened when they left? Well, they snapped up the Benetton driver. And I think one of the things that I think probably needs to happen a bit more is this more availability for drivers to look across as well as look up. You know, we've got a situation, for example, where and I think it's probably died down a little bit now, but let's say that Logan, I know it didn't happen, but let's say Logan Sargent did well at Williams a couple of years ago. And his next steps would have to be Mercedes, and then he's stuck. There's nowhere further he can go. Actually, you look at it in terms of Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz. Now, yes, they probably believe in the projects, but, you know. And actually, you think about it, literally just come to my mind right now of Ollie Behrman. Fantastic driver. Could end up in a similar sort of situation as George Russell. Hamilton wants to give it a real good go before he retires, so I can't see him moving on anytime soon. I can't see Charles Leclerc moving on anytime soon. So what? Ollie Behrman's going to stay at Haas? And his young, bright prospects, his potential is just going to wane away because it's not really been challenged enough. I know Ocon's a good driver, but Ocon is not on the same level as Leclerc and Hamilton. By the way, that's no slight. But I don't think it's unfair to say that George Russell right now doesn't feel like the number one driver anymore at Mercedes. And if that's the case, does he need to feel like he's number one to push ahead? It's tricky. I mean, what is next for this season is that George Russell could end up doing fantastically well, but it just feels like the momentum's on the side. And I think the other thing is that the life of social media, and I know this is probably going to bring it on a downward spiral here, but the life of social media means that it's not enough just to cheer on your own driver anymore. You have to drop negatives on every other driver. Like, I remember a time where it was just fun watching every driver. No one was really a Raikkonen fan, or a Montoya fan, or a Ralf Schumacher fan, or a Barrichello fan, or a Michael Schumacher fan, or an Alonso fan. We just liked some bloody good racing. And it was fun to watch, and we were excited by the drivers. And now we're in this age where you can't like Hamilton without disliking Verstappen or hating on Verstappen, or you can't like Verstappen without hating on Hamilton. You can't like Verstappen without hating on Russell. You can't like Hamilton without hating on Russell. And by the way, that's another matter altogether. That George Russell has been in this situation where he's been the villain of both Team LH and Verstappen fans. That's another matter to consider altogether. You can't like Kimi Antonelli without disliking Russell. You can't like Lando Norris without disliking Oscar Piastri, or you can't like Oscar Piastri without disliking Lando Norris. Why? Why the hell is that the case? Now, I might be speaking as someone, yes, who likes Lewis Hamilton, but I like all these other drivers. They've been fun to watch. It's only bad when it gets risky and dangerous, you know? The only time I've not liked Verstappen has been the times where he has caused an incident that's been dangerous to one or two of the drivers. That's it. The rest of the time, I enjoy his driving. And unfortunately for George, he is now caught in this situation where if you don't like him, you have to hate him, and that doesn't feel right. So, yeah, if we were talking about this in the 2000s, and again, I'm going back to these drivers again, we would be talking about George Russell as that Kimi Raikkonen, that Juan Pablo Montoya, that Fernando Alonso before he won his championship. Nothing wrong, just a really good driver. And yeah, there's probably better drivers than him. But he's still good. And it is still enjoyable watching him drive. Still enjoyable watching him defend. But I think when it comes to George, he's done nothing wrong. He's just been in the wrong place at the wrong time, whether in a microcosm when it comes to the season that he should have gone up to Mercedes, or it's a big picture thing where it was just a situation that he's an F1 driver at a time where F1 drivers have to be these media stars as well. And he's not a media darling. He's old school. I think that's why people don't like him too much, is that he is an old school driver. He's your Alan Prost. He doesn't really generate the headlines. It's Senna that generates the headlines, not Prost. In a Hunt's Lauda situation, it's not really Lauda that generates the headlines, it's Hunt. He's just a cold guy. And like I say, in Formula 1, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just not what the public wants. But again, do we forget this is a sport and not a reality show? George Russell doesn't need to be a Kardashian. He just needs to be a racing driver. And if he wins the title at the end of it, credit to him. He has done his best. But anyway, those are my thoughts on the George Russell situation. I think there's going to be a lot of opinions on George Russell, on why he's struggling and whether he's got the right mindset and things like that. But it just feels like, in terms of circumstances, he's quite an unlucky driver. Maybe not the unluckiest. I'd love to know your comments on if there's anyone that's more unlucky than George Russell. But certainly in that category. Anyway, in the meantime, guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and take care.